I was cleaning when my husband's phone fell from his jacket. It unlocked and I saw a message. She has no idea, playing the perfect husband. I kept scrolling. Then I saw a name that made my blood run cold. It was, subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching, get comfortable and relax, let's begin. My hand stopped moving. The cloth in my other hand, damp and smelling of lemon, hung suspended over the glass coffee table. I had been wiping a smudge, a single fingerprint marring the perfect surface. Marcus's phone, left on the couch, had buzzed. A preview of a message glowed on the locked screen. She has no idea, playing the perfect husband. The words were a physical impact. The air left the sunlit room. My own name was not in the message, but the she was me. That was the first fact. I registered it with a historian's detached precision. The second fact was the sender's name. Chloe. Chloe, my younger sister's best friend since high school. The woman who had cried at our wedding. The one who came for Thanksgiving every year, who always brought the pecan pie Marcus loved. Chloe, who had hugged me just last week and called me lucky. The phone screen went dark. I stood in the quiet living room, the silence now a dense, audible thing. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked. A lawnmower droned somewhere down the street. Normal sounds. The world continued. My hand lowered the cloth to the table. I placed it down with care as if it were made of crystal. I picked up the phone. It was warm. His passcode was our anniversary. The irony did not escape me even then. The lock screen dissolved and the message thread opened. It was not the only one. There were months of messages, jokes I had never heard, pet names that were not mine, discussions of hotel rooms, of dates aligned with his business trips. A photograph of our bed, sent from his perspective one morning while I was in the shower. The caption read, "Wish you were here." The details began to assemble. A receipt for a necklace I had never received. A reservation for two at a restaurant he had told me was a client dinner. The evidence was meticulous, and so was my consumption of it. I read without breathing, my heart a slow, heavy drum in my ears. I did not cry. I catalogued. The front door opened, his key in the lock, the familiar sound of his briefcase dropping onto the hall bench. "Alicia, I'm home." His voice, cheerful and full of owned space, sliced through the static in my head. My fingers moved. I exited the message thread, pressed the side button, plunged the phone into darkness. I set it back on the couch cushion, in the exact indentation I had lifted it from. I picked up the cleaning cloth. "In here," I called back. My voice did not shake. It was my first performance. He walked into the living room, loosening his tie. He looked the same. Marcus. 6 feet tall, suit tailored, smile easy and white. He came to me, bent and kissed my cheek. His cologne, sandalwood and citrus, filled my nostrils. It was the scent of my life, now poisoned. "What's for dinner?" he asked, glancing toward the kitchen. "Pot roast," I said. "It's in the slow cooker." "Perfect, long day, need a glass of wine." He patted my shoulder and moved past me, picking up his phone from the couch without a second glance. He scrolled as he walked to the kitchen. I watched his back. Did his shoulders tense? Did he pause to see if the phone had been moved? I saw nothing. He was utterly secure. I followed him. I watched him pour a glass of red wine. He took a long sip. "You okay?" he asked, noticing my gaze. "Just tired," I said. "Cleaning day." He nodded, his eyes already back on his phone screen, a small smile playing on his lips. A notification must have come in. From her. I turned to the sink and began washing the cloth. The hot water burned my hands, but I welcomed the sensation. It was a real, clean pain. I focused on it. I washed the cloth until the lemon scent was gone, replaced by the plain smell of soap. I wrung it out, folded it, hung it over the faucet to dry. Each movement was deliberate. Each was a stitch holding me together. We ate dinner at the dining table. I had set it this morning with the good linen placemats. The pot roast was tender. The carrots were sweet. He talked about a deal at work, a difficult colleague. I nodded, made sympathetic sounds. I asked the right questions. I passed the salt. I looked at him across the table. I saw the man I had loved for 12 years. I also saw a stranger, a skilled performer. The charm was a tool. The anecdotes were curated. The affection was a habit worn smooth from use. I wondered how long I had been an audience of one, watching a play whose real script was hidden from me. After dinner, he went to his study to send some emails. I cleared the table. My hands were steady. I loaded the dishwasher. I wiped the counters. The domestic rhythm was a kind of anesthesia. Later, in bed, he read a business journal. I pretended to read a novel. The space between us in our king-size bed felt vast, an icy gulf. He reached over and squeezed my foot under the covers, a familiar, absent-minded gesture of affection. "Love you," he murmured, not looking up from his article. The words hung in the dark room. They were part of his routine, a line in his play. "Good night, Marcus," I said. I did not sleep. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling. The shock had receded, leaving behind a cold, clear plain. The facts were assembled. The betrayal was confirmed. The hurt was a deep, silent chamber inside me, but I did not yet open the door to it. There would be time for that. First, there was work to do. I thought like an archivist. The discovery was merely the first document. It pointed to a larger, hidden collection. To understand the full story, one must locate all primary sources. One must verify, cross-reference, and establish provenance. Emotional responses were data, but they were not the methodology. My mind began to outline the next steps. The credit card statements he filed in his office desk, the calendar on his work laptop, the patterns of his trips, the digital footprints, Chloe's own life, her schedule, her husband, the community web we all inhabited, where this secret had spun like a parasitic thread. I did not want a confrontation. Not yet. A confrontation would be a release of pressure. It would allow him to craft a narrative, a midlife crisis, a moment of weakness, my possible failings as a wife. It would force the mess into the open prematurely, and he was better at public relations than I was. No, he valued control. He valued his reputation. He valued the perfect picture of his life, the beautiful home, the successful career, the devoted wife. That picture was his armor. My goal, taking shape in the dark, was not to scream at the armor. It was to dissect it, piece by piece, from the inside. To show him, and everyone who mattered, that the picture was a forgery. And then, to step out of the frame altogether. The first emotion that broke through the ice was not sadness, nor rage. It was a sharp, focused sense of purpose. I had spent years making a home, building a life around someone else's dream. I had set aside my own work, my own passions, to support his. That ended tonight. The woman who lay in that bed, the perfect wife, was already gone. She had vanished the moment those words glowed on the phone. In her place was someone older, quieter, and far more dangerous. Someone who remembered how to research, how to wait, how to build a case. I heard his breathing even out into sleep. I turned my head on the pillow and looked at his profile in the dim light from the window. A stranger, my project. I closed my eyes. I began to plan. The plan began in the morning light. I rose at my usual time before Marcus. I showered, dressed in comfortable clothes, and made coffee. The routine was the same, but I was a different person inside it. I was an observer in my own life. I watched Marcus come downstairs, kiss my cheek, gulp his coffee. I noted the time he left, the sound of his car pulling away. That first full day was for foundation work. I went to my home office, a room I used for paying bills and storing old textbooks. I opened my laptop and created a new digital file. I named it Research. Inside, I started a dated log. Day 1 post-discovery, * initial evidence, text message thread with C corroborating data needed, financial records, calendar anomalies, physical evidence. Objective, full documentation of the double life. Secondary objective, secure personal, financial, and legal position. Do not alert the subject. Writing it down made it real. It made it a project, not a personal hell. The log became my anchor. The week passed with a terrifying normalcy. I performed all my usual tasks. I grocery shopped. I gardened. I answered calls from my sister, Lacey, with a steady voice. She mentioned Chloe in passing, a story about them going to a new gym class together. I made a non-committal sound and wrote it in the log. C's routines likely align with Lacey. Potential source of alibi. Marcus was affectionate, attentive. He brought me flowers on Wednesday for no reason. I put them in a vase on the kitchen island. They were white lilies. I remembered Chloe mentioning once that lilies were her favorite. I did not mention this. I thanked him and smiled. The flowers stayed there, their scent filling the room, a test I passed each time I walked by. Saturday was for preparation. Sunday dinner was a tradition, once a month. My sister and her husband, my mother when she was in town, and often Chloe, who had become part of the extended family. This month, it was at our house. I cooked. I made a roast chicken with herbs, garlic mashed potatoes, glazed carrots, and green beans almondine. I baked 2 loaves of bread. I set the dining table with the china we used for holidays. The house smelled of warmth and effort. It looked like a photograph from a magazine about gracious living. Marcus helped, moving with a pleased energy. He enjoyed hosting. He enjoyed the performance of being the generous husband in the beautiful home. He uncorked bottles of wine. He selected music, something acoustic and inoffensive. The doorbell rang. Lacey and her husband, Ben, arrived first, bearing a bottle of wine and loud greetings. Then came Chloe. She walked in with a bright, familiar smile, holding a bakery box. "Pecan pie, as promised," she said, handing it to me. She was dressed casually but carefully in a soft sweater and dark jeans. Her hair was down. I saw her eyes scan the room, finding Marcus near the stereo. Their gaze held for a fraction of a second too long. "You didn't have to," I said, taking the box. My voice was light. "But you know it's his favorite." "I know," she said, and her smile became something else for an instant. A secret, shared knowledge, not with me, with him. We moved to the living room. Drinks were poured. I watched. It was a study in subtle signals. The way Chloe sat on the couch, angled toward where Marcus stood by the fireplace. The way he offered to refill her wine glass before anyone else's. A joke he told that was, he said, "From that podcast I was telling you about." I had never heard of the podcast. Chloe laughed as if she had. Lacey talked about work, about her kids. Ben discussed sports. The conversation flowed around me. I contributed enough, asked questions, but my primary function was to record. I saw Chloe's foot, clad in a stylish ankle boot, tap twice on the rug when Marcus made a particular point. I saw his thumb stroke the stem of his wineglass when he looked at her while she was speaking to Lacey. It was not overt. It was the language of intimacy, practiced and hidden in plain sight. They thought they were discreet. To someone who was not looking, it was nothing. To me, it was a broadcast. During dinner, the seating arrangement placed Chloe directly across from Marcus. I was at the head of the table. I had a perfect view. "This chicken is incredible, Alicia," Ben said, taking a second helping. "It's just a simple roast," I said. "Nothing simple about it," Marcus said, smiling at me. His performance was flawless. The devoted husband praising his wife's cooking. "She has the magic touch." Chloe took a sip of water. "It's all in the herbs, I think. You use a lot of rosemary, right, Alicia?" "Yes," I said, "from the garden." "I can never get mine to grow like yours," Chloe said. She turned to Marcus. "You built those raised beds for her, didn't you? A few summers ago." He nodded, expanding under the attention. "Sure did. Took a whole weekend. Backbreaking work, but worth it to see her out there with her hands in the dirt." He said it with fondness, as if recalling a cherished memory. He had complained the entire weekend about the heat and the cost of the lumber. I remembered the sunburn on my neck, the blisters on my palms. I remembered him spending most of that Sunday on his phone, texting. I looked at Chloe. Had she been on the other end of those texts, offering sympathy for his hard labor in my service? "You're a lucky man," Chloe said, her voice sweet. Her eyes met his over the centerpiece. "I know," he said, and his gaze swung to me, full of manufactured sincerity. The food in my mouth turned to paste. I swallowed with difficulty. I took a drink of wine. The red liquid was the only warm thing inside me. After dessert, as we cleared plates, Chloe followed me into the kitchen with a stack of dishes. Marcus and Ben were in the living room, and Lacey was using the bathroom. "Let me help you with these," Chloe said, her voice low and confiding. She stood close to me at the sink. "Thank you," I said, not looking at her. It's such a lovely tradition, these dinners, she mused, scraping food scraps into the disposal. You and Marcus, you really have built a perfect life here. It's inspiring. I turned on the water to rinse a plate. The sound was loud. It's just life, I said. Nothing is perfect. Oh, come on, she said, nudging me with her elbow, a girlish, friendly gesture. It's okay to admit it. You have a great husband, a beautiful home. You make it look easy. I finally looked at her. Her expression was open, admiring. There was no trace of guilt, only a faint, wistful envy. It was this, more than anything, that clarified the situation for me. She did not see herself as a home wrecker. She saw herself as an appreciative audience to Marcus's performance. Perhaps she even saw me as a lucky but oblivious prop. She pitied me for not fully appreciating the man I had, the man who confided in her about the burdens of his perfect marriage. It takes work, I said, my tone neutral. A lot of unseen work. She misinterpreted my meaning. I'm sure it does. He's a busy man, high-powered. He needs a lot of support. She said it as if she were an expert on his needs. Yes, I agreed. He does. That night, after everyone had left and the house was clean and quiet, I went to my office. Marcus was already asleep, exhausted from the day's performance. I opened my log. Sunday dinner observation, asterisk subject, and C engaged in sustained, low-level intimacy signaling throughout event. Behaviors include preferential attention, shared references unknown to the group, prolonged eye contact. C exhibits a sense of proprietary knowledge regarding subject's life and preferences. She is embedded in the social fabric, which provides cover and exacerbates the betrayal's reach. Note, C appears to believe her role is that of a sympathetic confidant to subject, not an adversary to me. This may be useful. I saved the file and encrypted it. I sat back in my chair. The emotional storm was there, held behind a thick glass wall. I acknowledged its presence. The humiliation of serving pie to the woman who shared my husband's bed, the rage at their secret smiles, the profound loneliness of being a ghost in my own dining room. But I did not let it in. I had a more pressing task. The reconnaissance was complete. The enemy's position was noted. The next phase required more direct intelligence gathering. The public facade had been observed. Now it was time to examine the private machinery that made it run. The credit card statements in his desk, the phone records, the calendar. I powered down the laptop. The room was dark. From upstairs, I heard the faint, regular sound of Marcus's snoring. The sound of a man at peace, secure in his deception. I turned off the light and went upstairs. I did not go to the bedroom. I walked past the closed door and into the guest room. I lay down on the made bed, still dressed. I stared at the ceiling. The performance was over. The research had begun. The guest room became my base of operations. I began sleeping there regularly, telling Marcus I was restless and didn't want to disturb him. He accepted this with a shrug, a minor inconvenience easily outweighed by the convenience of my silence. My days took on a new structure. The mornings were for normalcy, making breakfast, managing the house. The afternoons, when Marcus was at work, were for research. I started with the physical evidence in our home. His home office was kept locked, but the key was in a small decorative bowl on his dresser, a place he considered hidden. I used it. The room smelled of his cologne and leather. I worked quickly, taking photographs with my phone. I opened the filing cabinet. I found the folder labeled Personal Finances. The credit card statements were revealing. There were charges for a hotel in the city on a night he had told me he was working late. A dinner at an expensive restaurant I had never been to, for two, the week prior. A recurring monthly charge for a private gym downtown. Marcus used the corporate gym in his building. I noted the name and address. I found receipts for gifts, a jeweler's receipt for a pair of earrings. I had not received earrings, a receipt from a boutique for a silk scarf. I did not own a silk scarf from that store. I photographed each one, noting the dates. I replaced everything exactly as I found it. I checked the angle of the folders, the position of the chair. I locked the door and returned the key. The digital evidence required more care. I needed access to his laptop. He took it to work every day, but he often left it on the kitchen counter in the evening while he watched sports. One night, I saw my opportunity. He was engrossed in a game, a beer in hand. "I'm going to run a load of laundry," I said. He grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes on the screen. I picked up his laptop as if to move it out of the way. "I'll just put this on the desk," I said. "Yeah, fine." I carried it to his study. My heart beat hard against my ribs. I opened it. It asked for a password. I tried a few combinations: his birthday, our anniversary, his old college football number. The last one worked. The screen opened to his email. I did not have time to read. I inserted a small, encrypted flash drive I had purchased. I installed a simple keylogging program a tech-savvy acquaintance from my former life had once described to me. It would record his keystrokes and send the data to a secure online drive I had set up. It was a risk, but a calculated one. I needed his passwords, his patterns. I closed the laptop and returned it to the kitchen counter before the commercial break ended. The keylogger provided data within 24 hours. I now had passwords to his personal email, his social media, and his cloud storage. That evening, while he was in the shower, I accessed his personal email from my own laptop in the guest room. The correspondence with Chloe was not extensive there. They used messaging apps. But his email contained other useful information. Travel confirmations for trips that were ostensibly for one person, but with hints of double occupancy. A forwarded email about a couple's spa weekend. A receipt for 2 tickets to a concert that had occurred months ago, a concert he told me he had attended with a client. I compiled it all. The document on my laptop grew. It was a timeline of deceit, annotated with my own movements, my own believed reality set against his hidden one. The sheer volume of it was numbing. This was not a fling. It was a parallel life, maintained with effort and precision. The weight of the secret became physical. I carried it in my shoulders, in the tightness of my jaw. I knew I could not do this alone indefinitely. I needed a soundboard, someone who could look at the evidence without the personal devastation. I needed Irene. I called her on a Thursday morning. "I need to see you," I said. My voice was flat. She did not ask questions. "Come now, I'll put the kettle on." Irene lived 20 minutes away in a neighborhood of older, well-kept houses. Her home was a testament to a life fully lived, filled with books, plants, and the smell of whatever she had last baked. She met me at the door, her sharp eyes scanning my face. She hugged me, a firm, warm embrace, then held me at arm's length. "You look like you haven't slept in a month. Come to the kitchen." I followed her. The kitchen was warm and bright. A teapot was already steaming on the table between 2 mismatched mugs. She gestured for me to sit. "Is it Marcus?" she asked, getting straight to the point. I nodded. I opened my laptop, turned it to face her, and opened the main evidence file. I did not speak. I let her read. Irene put on her reading glasses. She scrolled in silence for a long time. Her expression shifted from concern to focused concentration, then to a hard, cold anger. She finally looked up at me. "Chloe," she said. The word was a verdict. "Yes." "That little viper." Irene took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "And him, all this time, the perfect Marcus." She looked at me. "What do you want to do, Alicia?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that. I don't want a messy divorce where he spins a story and I'm the hysterical wife. I don't want to give him the chance to explain it away. "Good," she said. "So you're gathering ammunition." "I'm gathering facts. I'm building a case. But I need to know what I'm aiming for. I need a plan." Irene leaned forward. "What does he value most? Not you, clearly. What does that man cherish above all else?" I knew the answer immediately. His reputation, the image, the perfect husband, the rising star, the good son, the facade. "Then that's the target," Irene said, her voice low and sure. "You don't burn down the house. You show everyone that the beautiful house is full of termites. You make the facade crack in public so he can't patch it up with lies. And you walk away clean with everything you're entitled to." Hearing it stated so clearly was like a key turning in a lock. "Yes." "What's your financial situation?" I have some savings from before we were married. He handles the main accounts. I have access, but I haven't touched anything. Get your own account at a different bank. Start moving small, reasonable amounts. Money for groceries, household things. Build a cushion. See a lawyer, but do it quietly. I know someone. She scribbled a name and number on a notepad. She's discreet. Tell her everything. She'll tell you what you need to do to protect yourself. I took the paper. Thank you, Irene. She reached across the table and gripped my hand. Her hand was warm, the skin papery. Listen to me. You are not alone in this. You are smarter than him. You were always smarter. You just forgot because he liked you being the supportive one in the background. Time to step back into the light, Doctor. The use of my title, dormant for years, was a jolt. Dr. Carter. I had a PhD in history. I had written a dissertation on archival silences, the things left out of the official record. Now I was studying the most painful silence of my own life. I'm scared, I admitted, the first time I had said it aloud. Of course you are, but you're also angry. Use that. Channel it into this. She tapped my laptop. Be the archivist, be the historian, document everything. Then when the time is right, you publish your findings. I left her house an hour later, the teapot empty. The weight was still there, but it was different. It was no longer a burden I carried alone in the dark. It was a shared load, a strategic payload. I had an ally. I had a direction. That night, I created a new folder in my research file. I labeled it the blueprint. Inside, I started a new document. The first line read, Objective, controlled demolition of Marcus Carter's public reputation, resulting in my clean financial and legal separation. Method, strategic exposure of documented hypocrisy. Requirement, absolute patience and precision. The emotional storm still raged on the other side of the glass. But in the eye of the hurricane where I now worked, it was calm. It was quiet. I had a plan to draft. The blueprint required more than a document. It required action. The morning after my visit to Irene, I opened the file and began executing the first phase, securing my position. I drove to a bank branch across town, one where Marcus and I did not have an account. I used my maiden name, Alicia Carter. I opened a checking and a savings account with a portion of the pre-marriage savings I had kept in a dormant account. The amount was modest, but it was a start. I ordered a debit card to be sent to a P.O. box I rented under the same name. I left the bank feeling a small, sharp sense of autonomy. Next, I contacted the lawyer Irene recommended. Sylvia Grant's office was downtown, in a building of understated granite and glass. Her space was tidy, professional, and silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Sylvia herself was a woman in her 50s with a calm, assessing gaze. Irene said you needed discreet advice, she began, after I sat down. I am gathering evidence of my husband's infidelity and financial deception, I stated, my voice even. I intend to file for divorce. I want to ensure my actions now do not compromise my position later. She nodded. Smart, tell me what you have done so far. I outlined my actions, the photographing of documents from his office, the keylogger, the separate bank account. She listened without interruption, taking notes. The keylogger is legally problematic if you were to try to use anything obtained from it in court, she said. It can be considered an invasion of privacy. However, the documents physically located in your shared home are generally fair game. The separate finances are wise. Do not drain joint accounts. Continue with small, justifiable transfers for household expenses. Document every reason. Do you have a list of all assets? I have access to statements. I can compile it. Do that. Bring it to me. We will file when you are ready, but preparation is everything. Your goal is not just to leave, but to leave with what you are entitled to. The evidence of adultery can influence spousal support and the division of assets, especially given the duration and the personal connection. She gave me a look of professional sympathy. It makes it more egregious. My goal is also a specific kind of exposure, I said carefully. I want the truth about his character known in our social and professional circles. Sylvia leaned back in her chair. That is not a legal matter. That is a personal strategy. I will advise you to be cautious. Defamation is a risk, but truth is an absolute defense. If what you reveal is documented fact and you reveal it to parties with a legitimate interest, your risk is minimal. Timing, however, is everything. I understand. She gave me a list of further documents to gather. As I stood to leave, she said, "Dr. Carter, Irene told me what you did before. Historian. This process you're engaged in, its historical methodology. Use it, be meticulous. It will serve you better than anger." I returned home, her words settling into my plan. Meticulous, I could be that. The following week, I initiated the second part of the blueprint, reconnecting with my own past. I logged into my long-dormant LinkedIn profile. I updated it, simply listing my PhD and my former university affiliation. I did not mention my current occupation as homemaker. I reached out to a few former colleagues, polite, brief messages. "Hope you're well. I'm exploring a return to archival work. Would love to catch up." One responded quickly. David Chen, who now worked at the State Historical Society. We agreed to meet for coffee at a neutral, quiet cafe near his office. I dressed not as a suburban wife, but in a simple blouse and trousers I hadn't worn in years. I brought a professional tote bag. David was already there, looking much the same, just a little grayer. "Alicia, it's so good to see you," he said, standing to greet me. "You look great." "Thank you, David. You too." We made small talk about mutual acquaintances. Then he asked, "So, a return to the archives, what prompted that?" "I've had some time to think," I said, stirring my coffee. "I miss the work, the focus, the satisfaction of putting a narrative together from fragments. I remember your dissertation. Brilliant work on gaps in the record. It's more relevant than ever." He took a sip. "The Society has a new grant-funded project, cataloging and digitizing early 20th century community records from underrepresented neighborhoods. It's a lot of organizational work, identifying silences, creating context. We're looking for a project consultant. It's part-time, flexible, mostly remote with some site visits. The pay isn't corporate, but..." He shrugged. "I thought of you immediately. Would you be interested?" It was an opening, a real, tangible thread back to the person I had been. "I would be very interested," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It sounds exactly like the kind of work I value." "Great, I'll send you the proposal and the grant details. We could really use your eye." He paused. "Is everything all right? It's been a long time." "Everything is clarifying itself," I said, which was true. "It's time for a new chapter." I left the cafe with a flutter of something that was not happiness, but possibility. I had a potential job, a purpose outside the walls of that house. It was a piece of my future, separate from Marcus. That evening, I added a new section to the blueprint. Phase 3, Rebuilding Independent Identity. Under it, I listed *1, Secure Consulting Position in Progress, 2, Reestablish Professional Network, 3, Develop Separate Social Routines. I also noted a date from the family calendar hanging in the kitchen. Our wedding anniversary was in 5 weeks. Marcus, a connoisseur of his own image, would want to celebrate it publicly. He would plan a party. It would be the perfect stage for the first, subtle crack in his facade. I didn't know yet what I would do, but I knew the when. The anniversary party. I closed the laptop. I walked through the quiet house. I stopped in the living room, the same room where I had found the phone. The memory was no longer a raw wound. It was a data point, the genesis of my project. Marcus was working late again, or so he said. I didn't check. It didn't matter. His lies were now just variables in my equation. I went to the guest room, my room. I took out the business card Sylvia Grant had given me and placed it in the small lockbox where I kept my new bank documents. Then I opened a novel, one from my own shelf, not one he had bought for me. I read until my eyes grew heavy. The plan was no longer just words on a screen. It was in motion. I had a lawyer. I had a potential job. I had a target date. The shattered pieces of my life were not being glued back into the old shape. They were being sorted, examined, and reassembled into something new, something of my own design. The blueprint was becoming a structure, and I was finally its architect. The party arrived with the precision of a military campaign. Marcus had chosen a venue downtown, a modern event space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a rooftop terrace. He handled all the arrangements, reveling in the role of the doting husband planning a surprise celebration. I offered suggestions when asked, praised his choices, and selected a dress, a deep blue sheath that was elegant and understated. I wanted to look like the dignified wife, not the star of the show. The show was his. The night was clear and cool. The room glittered with the soft light of chandeliers. Our guests were a mix of our neighbors, Marcus's colleagues and clients, a few of my old friends and family. Lacey and Ben were there. Chloe was not. Marcus had told me she had a prior commitment, a family thing. I nodded, my face a mask of mild disappointment. He seemed relieved at my easy acceptance. I stood beside Marcus at the entrance, greeting everyone. My hand was tucked in the crook of his arm. He was expansive, shaking hands, pulling people into brief hugs, his laughter ringing out. He kept touching me, a hand on my back, a squeeze of my waist, each touch a public claim. "You look stunning," he murmured in my ear as a couple walked past. "Thank you," I said, smiling up at him, the picture of wifely admiration. Inside, I circulated. I spoke to our neighbors about their gardens. I asked Marcus's junior colleagues about their projects. I laughed at appropriate moments. I was, to anyone observing, perfectly happy, but my eyes were cataloging. I noted who was here, who was engrossed in conversation with whom. I noted Alina and Robert Carter, Marcus's parents. They beamed with pride, holding court near the fireplace. His reputation as a good son was paramount to them. The pivotal moment came during dessert. A 3-tiered cake was wheeled out. Marcus made a speech. He spoke of 12 wonderful years of partnership, of my unwavering support. He called me his anchor. The guests applauded. I kept my smile in place, my eyes slightly misty. It was a masterful performance. As the applause died down, Marcus was pulled away by his boss for a conversation. I found myself near his parents. Alina Carter took my hands in hers. Her grip was firm, her diamonds cool against my skin. "Alicia, dear, he's so lucky to have you. This is all so beautiful. You both have built such a perfect life together." I leaned in as if to share a confidence. My voice was warm, pitched just for her. "Thank you, Alina. It means so much to hear you say that. We do try. Though," I added with a light, self-deprecating laugh, "perfection is such a fragile thing, isn't it? It's the secrets we don't see that hold it all together, I think." I said it softly, almost musingly. Then I gave her hands a gentle squeeze and pulled back, my expression still one of touched gratitude. Alina's smile remained, but her eyes flickered, just for an instant. A faint line appeared between her brows. It was not confusion, but a spark of sudden, instinctive curiosity. "Secrets?" she asked, her voice still light. "Oh, you know," I said, waving a hand dismissively. "The little things we all keep to ourselves to maintain the peace, the unspoken compromises." I let my gaze drift lovingly toward Marcus across the room. He works so hard to make everything seem effortless. I just hope he knows he doesn't have to carry it all alone. I had given her nothing concrete, only a shadow, a suggestion that the perfect picture might have a complexity she was unaware of, that her son might be keeping burdens or secrets from even his doting wife. To a mother proud of her son's perfect life, it was a tiny, invisible crack in the varnish. She would not act on it, not yet, but the seed was planted. It would lie dormant, waiting for the right conditions to sprout doubt. I excused myself to use the ladies' room. Inside the cool, marble-lined space, I leaned against the sink and looked at my reflection. The woman in the mirror was calm. Her makeup was flawless. Her eyes were clear. I felt a strange detachment. The comment to Alina was my first active move. It was a minor adjustment, a single brushstroke on the large canvas of his reputation. But it was mine. For the rest of the evening, I watched Alina. I saw her watching Marcus more closely. I saw her glance at me once or twice with a new, speculative look. Later, as the party wound down, Marcus found me. He was flushed with success, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Everyone is saying it's the best party they've been to in years," he said, slipping an arm around me. "You were perfect." "It was a lovely party," I agreed. "You outdid yourself." He looked down at me, his expression suddenly serious, a practiced earnestness in his eyes. "I mean it, Alicia. 12 years. Here's to 12 more." He clinked his glass gently against my empty champagne flute. I met his gaze and held it, letting my smile soften into something that looked like profound emotion. "To the future," I said. In the car on the way home, he was quiet, satisfied. I looked out the window at the passing city lights. The performance was over. The first subtle move had been made. I replayed the moment with Alina in my mind. The exact wording, her reaction. It had been effective because it was true. Our life was held together by secrets. His, and now mine. At home, he went straight to bed, tired from his performance. I changed out of the blue dress and hung it carefully in the closet. In the guest room, I opened my laptop. In the blueprint file, under a new heading, Phase 4, Active Measures, I made an entry. Asterisk Anniversary Party. Subject, Alina Carter. Method, implied vulnerability regarding secrets and unspoken compromises. Observation, seed of doubt successfully planted. Subject exhibited increased scrutiny of Marcus post-interaction. No further action required at this time. Allow to germinate. I closed the laptop. The party had been a test of my own ability to perform under pressure, to manipulate the narrative without detection. I had passed. The facade was still intact, but I had introduced a microscopic flaw. From the outside, nothing had changed, but the integrity of the structure was now compromised. The next phase would require more direct evidence, more tangible threads to pull. The anniversary party had been the opening gambit. The real work began now. The days after the party were dedicated to tightening the net. The seed was planted with Alina. Now I needed the tools to make the tree fall. I returned to my archives, but these were digital and financial. The keylogger had provided a wealth of data. I had access to his email drafts, where he composed messages to Chloe but didn't send them, perhaps as a precaution. They were detailed, affectionate, and damning. I saved them. The credit card statements showed a pattern. Charges at the downtown gym coincided with after-work hours on days Chloe, according to Lacey's casual updates, had her late meetings. Hotel charges were often booked under his corporate account, but the incidental charges, room service for 2 spa treatments, were on his personal card. I created a spreadsheet, cross-referencing dates, times, and locations. It was a map of his double life. I needed something more concrete, something audible. Sylvia Grant had advised caution, but she had also said that in our state, recording a conversation was legal if one party consented. I was one party. I purchased a small, voice-activated recorder. I tested it in my purse. The sound was clear. I waited for an opportunity. It came on a Tuesday evening. Marcus was in a good mood. He'd had a successful quarter. He poured himself a sisky and sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone. I sat in my usual chair, a book in my lap. The recorder was in the pocket of my cardigan. "The Andersons are having a block party next weekend," I said, making conversation. "Should we go?" "If you want to," he said, not looking up. "I might have to work." "Another late one." I kept my tone light, concerned. He sighed, a sound of put-upon importance. "The pressure never lets up. You have no idea. Sometimes I just need to decompress after, clear my head." "I understand," I said softly. "You work so hard for us, for this." I gestured around the room. "I just worry you take on too much. All those late nights, the trips, it must be lonely." He finally looked at me, his expression softening into a mask of marital solidarity. "It is, but it's worth it. For our future. You know that, right?" "Of course," I paused. "It's just I notice things. The extra charges on the card for the gym downtown. The fancy dinners. I'm not complaining," I added quickly. "I just want to make sure you're not overdoing it or feeling like you have to keep things from me to spare my feelings. We're a team." His face went carefully blank for a second. Then he manufactured a look of mild affront. "Keep things from you? What things? The gym is for stress. The dinners are client meetings. You know how it is." "I do," I said, nodding, injecting a note of relief into my voice. "I'm sorry. I just get silly sometimes. I see the receipts and my mind jumps to the worst, like some husband having a secret life." I offered a weak smile. He chuckled, a dry sound. "A secret life, with my schedule, please. It's all just part of the game, Alicia. Maintaining the image. You play your part, I play mine. It's how we keep all this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the house, the life. It's just business. You play your part, I play mine. The recorder captured every word. It was not a confession of the affair, but it was a confession of the philosophy behind it. The game, the image. It was perfect. The next day, I met David Chen at the bookstore cafe as planned. I brought notes for the Historical Society project, a legitimate reason to be there. We discussed metadata standards and community outreach for an hour. As we were packing up, he slid a manila envelope across the table. The formal offer letter, he said, and the grant documentation. We'd love to have you on board. I took the envelope. It had weight. Thank you, David. This means a great deal. I'm glad you're coming back, he said sincerely. The work needs your perspective. I left the cafe with the envelope in my tote bag, next to my tablet that held the evidence files. One represented my future, the other the key to unlocking it. The symbolism was not lost on me. That evening, I went to Irene's. I played her the recording. We sat at her kitchen table, the recorder between us like a secular relic. You play your part, I play mine. It's how we keep all this. It's just business. Irene's lips pressed into a thin line. Cold, she said. He reduced your entire marriage to a business arrangement, to a game. It explains everything, I said. He doesn't see it as betrayal. He sees it as a separate, necessary division of labor. The public husband, the private lover. The wife is just another component of the public face. Do you have enough, she asked, for the final phase? I opened my laptop. I showed her the spreadsheet, the email drafts, the photographed receipts. I showed her the file I had labeled exposure package. It was a curated selection of the most damning evidence, organized chronologically, with a summary page. It told a clear, undeniable story of sustained deception. I have the facts, I said. Now I need the delivery system, the when and the how. Irene studied the screen. His parents, the company, the community, they all need to see this, but not from you directly, not at first. Agreed. I had been thinking about this. Anonymous, but traceable back to him. A leak, not an accusation. And it needs to hit at a moment when his guard is down, when he's most focused on his image. Is there an event? Irene asked. I nodded. The awards gala, for the Regional Business Leadership Award. He's a finalist. It's in 3 weeks, black tie. His boss, his colleagues, his parents will be there. It's the peak of his public image. Irene's eyes gleamed with understanding. That's your stage. That's the stage where the backdrop falls down, I corrected. I don't need to be the one to pull it. I just need to ensure the ropes are cut beforehand. We spent the next hour planning the logistics. The evidence would be mailed to 3 parties. The head of his company's ethics board, his parents, and a new addition, Chloe's husband, Mark. The packages would be sent from a different city, with no return address. They would arrive the morning of the gala. The timing was critical. The shockwaves would hit just as he was preparing to bask in his greatest professional recognition. I left Irene's house late. The plan was solid. The evidence was irrefutable. The target was set. All that remained was the final, quiet act of putting the packages in the mail. The net was no longer tightening around him. It was ready to be lifted, revealing the trapped creature within for all to see. My hand was on the winch. I just had to wait for the perfect, windless day. The plan was set. All that remained was the waiting and the careful maintenance of my performance. But a performer can become too comfortable in their role. I had grown calmer, more contained. I had my own purpose now with the Historical Society project. I spent hours in my office, not just on my research, but on real work, cataloging, writing summaries. I had places to be that were not the grocery store or the garden center. This change, subtle to me, was a seismic shift in the ecosystem of our marriage. Marcus noticed. He noticed the closed door of my office. He noticed my focus on my laptop, not on him. He noticed the new notebook I carried, filled with notes about archival methods, not shopping lists. For a man whose world revolved around his own centrality, my independent focus was an anomaly, a glitch in his system. It began with small comments. "You're buried in that thing lately," he said one evening, nodding at my laptop as I worked at the kitchen table. "It's a consulting project," I said without looking up. For the State Historical Society, it's interesting work. Since when? He asked, his voice light but with an edge. Since they offered it to me, I replied, finally meeting his eyes. I have a PhD in history, Marcus. It's not a hobby. He blinked, surprised by the directness. I know that. I just wasn't aware you were looking. I wasn't looking. An opportunity presented itself. I went back to my work. The dismissal was clear and it unnerved him. The next test came a few days later. I had met Irene for lunch and returned home in the mid-afternoon. He was there, which was unusual for a weekday. You're home early, I said, hanging my coat. Slow day, he said, watching me. Where were you? Lunch with Irene. You two have been spending a lot of time together. She's my friend, I said, moving past him toward the kitchen for a glass of water. Is everything okay with you? He asked, following me. His tone was concerned, but it was the concern of a technician checking a malfunctioning machine. Yes, why wouldn't it be? You're just different, distant. He leaned against the doorway, crossing his arms. Are you upset about something? Did I do something? It was a classic preemptive move. If I was acting differently, the problem must be with me, or I must be manufacturing a grievance against him. He was probing, trying to locate the source of the glitch so he could reset it. I turned to face him, my expression one of mild curiosity. Distant? I don't feel distant, I feel focused. I have my own work now, that's all, it's a good thing. I smiled, a small, closed-lipped smile. You've always said you wanted me to be happy and fulfilled. I am. The words were his own, reflected back at him. He couldn't argue with them, but they didn't satisfy him. My happiness, if it was independent of him, was suspect. It's just not like you, he persisted. The closed door, the lunches, this project, it's a sudden change. Is it? I asked, tilting my head. Or have you just not been paying attention to what I do when I'm not directly attending to you or the house? The question hung in the air, sharp and quiet. It was not an accusation, but an observation, and it hit its mark. His jaw tightened slightly. I had never spoken to him like that before. That's not fair, he said, his voice hardening. I provide everything for this household. My attention is on bigger things. You know the pressure I'm under. And there it was. The pivot to his victimhood, his burden. The attempt to gaslight me into feeling guilty for having a thought outside of his orbit. I do know, I said, my voice softening into a tone of wifely sympathy. It was a tone I could now produce on command, like selecting a tool. And I appreciate it. That's why I'm trying not to add to your burdens. My project is my own. It doesn't take anything away from you or our life. It just gives me something else to think about besides whether we need more milk. I walked over and placed a hand on his arm, a brief, reassuring touch. Don't worry about me. I'm fine. Better than fine. The physical contact, the soothing words were meant to placate. They usually worked. This time, they seemed to unsettle him further. He was looking for a fight, for tears, for a demand for attention. He was prepared to manage a crisis of my making. He was not prepared for serene independence. My calm was a wall he could not scale or dismantle. He stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for a crack. He found none. Okay, he said finally, the words stiff. If you say so. He turned and walked away, back to his study. I heard the door click shut, louder than necessary. I stood in the kitchen, the silence settling around me. The encounter was a data point. His paranoia was activating. He could sense the ground shifting, but he couldn't see the fault line. His response was to try and assert control, to diagnose and fix the problem me. But I was no longer a problem he could fix. I was a variable he had not accounted for. That night, and in the days that followed, I observed his increased vigilance. He would ask casual questions about my schedule. He checked his phone more frequently, as if expecting some external sign to explain my behavior. He was looking for a cause, another man, perhaps. The idea that the cause was his own actions, now being methodically documented, did not seem to occur to him. His guilt did not manifest as fear of exposure. It manifested as irritation at my deviation from the script. The balance of power, imperceptible to anyone else, had tilted. He was no longer the unobserved observer in his own home. He was being observed, and he felt it. He just didn't know who was holding the lens. His confusion was my confirmation. The plan was working even before the packages were mailed. The first unraveling was not of his secrets, but of his certainty. And for a man like Marcus, certainty was the bedrock of his world. I had removed a single, crucial stone. The rest would follow in time. The packages were ready. I had spent the previous evening at Irene's kitchen table, the final assembly line. We used a cheap, generic printer she had bought for cash. We wore gloves. The evidence packets were identical, a cover sheet with a simple, typed list of contents, credit card statements, highlighted, hotel receipts, email drafts, recorded conversation transcript. No accusations, just facts. The audio file was included on a plain USB drive. 3 envelopes. One addressed to the chair of the Ethics Oversight Board at Marcus's company. One to Robert and Alina Carter, his parents. One to Mark, Chloe's husband, at his office address, which I had found through public records. No return address. The postage was prepaid, purchased from a machine. The morning of the mailing was the day before the awards gala. Marcus had left early for a pre-event breakfast meeting. He was buzzing with anticipation, already dressed in one of his best suits. He kissed my cheek, a perfunctory brush of lips. "Big day tomorrow," he said, adjusting his cufflinks in the hall mirror. "You have the dress ready." "It's ready," I said. "Good, it's going to be a perfect night." He said it like a command, a decree. "I'm sure it will be," I replied. After his car disappeared down the street, I went to the guest room. I changed into jeans and a plain sweater. I put my hair in a ponytail. I placed the 3 thick envelopes into a reusable shopping bag, along with a novel I had finished. I drove out of our suburb, toward the next county. I had selected a post office in a busy strip mall 25 miles away. The drive was quiet. I did not play music. I thought about nothing. I observed the road, the other cars, the changing landscape from manicured lawns to commercial sprawl. I was a courier performing a delivery. The emotional weight of the envelopes was not with me. I had already transferred it onto the paper, onto the USB drive. My task was logistical. I parked in a crowded lot. The post office was busy with midday customers. I stood in line, the shopping bag at my feet. When it was my turn, I approached the counter. The clerk was an older woman with glasses on a chain. "I need to mail these," I said, my voice neutral. She took them, weighed each one on the scale, confirmed the prepaid postage was sufficient. She processed them without comment, sliding them into a bin behind her. They disappeared from my sight. "Anything else?" she asked. "No, thank you." I left the post office. I got back in my car. The shopping bag was lighter, containing only my novel. I sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel. I expected to feel something: triumph, fear, remorse. I felt a profound and simple emptiness, a space where a great pressure had been. It was not relief, exactly. It was finality. The mechanism was now in motion. I had pulled the lever. The packages would travel through the system and arrive at their destinations tomorrow morning. The timing was, as Irene and I had calculated, impeccable. The ethics board would receive it at the start of the business day. His parents would get it with their morning mail. Chloe's husband would find it on his desk. I drove to a park a few miles away. I bought a cup of tea from a cart and sat on a bench. I opened my novel and read a few pages, but the words were just shapes. I was waiting for my own reaction. It did not come. I felt calm. The plan was no longer mine to steer. It had its own momentum. After an hour, I drove home. I returned to the rhythms of the day. I made a salad for lunch. I reviewed some notes for the Historical Society project. I pressed my gown for the gala, a simple black dress I had chosen for its funereal elegance. I would play my part one last time. Marcus came home late, energized from his day. He talked about the other finalists, about the speech he might have to give if he won. He practiced a few gracious lines in front of the mirror. I listened, nodding at the right moments. "You're quiet," he said, catching my reflection behind him. "Just tired," I said, "and a little nervous for you. It's a big night." He smiled, a genuine smile of self-satisfaction. "Don't be nervous. It's in the bag. Everything is falling into place. I met his eyes in the mirror. Yes, I said, I believe it is. He had no idea what was falling or where it was landing. His confidence was absolute. It was the last night he would ever possess it. I felt a flicker then, not of pity, but of a distant, academic recognition. I was about to witness the collapse of a worldview. I had engineered it, but I would also be its most attentive witness. I went to bed early in the guest room. I did not sleep deeply, but I slept. My mind was clear. There was nothing left to plan, nothing left to decide. The offering had been made. The truth was in the mail. All that remained was to attend the ceremony and observe the consequences of its delivery. The path ahead was straight and unavoidable. For the first time in months, I felt no tension about the future. It was already written. I just had to turn the page. The morning of the gala passed in a quiet hum. Marcus was uncharacteristically jittery, checking his phone, his tie, the weather. The packages I knew had been delivered. The silence was the calm before the storm. I dressed with care. The black dress was simple, its lines clean. I wore minimal jewelry. I wanted to be a silhouette, a shadow in the background of his bright, collapsing star. The venue was a hotel ballroom downtown, all crystal and gold. The air smelled of expensive perfume and anticipation. Marcus gripped my elbow as we entered, his smile wide and fixed. We found our table, seated with his senior colleagues and their spouses. His parents were at a nearby table. Eleanor Carter caught my eye and gave a tight, strained smile. The package had been received. The dinner was served. Speeches began. Marcus was tense, his knee bouncing under the table. He checked his phone repeatedly, frowning when there were no notifications. He was waiting for congratulations, for news of his win. He was not expecting the other messages that were, by now, circulating in certain pockets of the room. The first sign was his parents approaching our table. Robert Carter's face was pale, his mouth a hard line. Eleanor looked devastated, her eyes red-rimmed. They did not look at me. "Marcus," Robert said, his voice low but cutting through the ambient chatter. "We need to speak with you, now." Marcus looked up, confused, then irritated at the interruption. "Can it wait, Dad? They're about to announce the award." "No," Robert said. The word was final. Marcus's smile wavered. He glanced at me, then at his colleagues who were politely pretending not to listen. "All right, excuse me for a moment." He stood and followed his parents to a corner of the room. I watched, my face arranged in a mask of polite concern. I saw Robert's hand gesture, sharp. I saw Marcus's back stiffen. I saw him shake his head, then run a hand over his face. The confident posture began to crumple from the inside. He returned to the table a few minutes later, his complexion ashen. He did not sit. "Alicia, I need to." Before he could finish, his boss, Richard Vance, appeared at his side. Richard's expression was unreadable, a corporate mask, but his eyes were cold. "Marcus, my office. First thing tomorrow morning, don't be late." He didn't wait for a reply, just gave a curt nod to the table and walked away. The colleagues exchanged glances. The unspoken question hung in the air. Marcus stood frozen, a man realizing the ground was giving way beneath him. Then, from the entrance of the ballroom, a new disturbance. A man I recognized from a single photograph on Lacey's social media, Mark, Chloe's husband. He was not dressed for a gala. He wore a jacket over a rumpled shirt. He scanned the room, his gaze locking onto Marcus. He began walking toward our table, his steps deliberate. A hush fell over our immediate area. This was not corporate. This was personal and raw. Mark stopped a foot from Marcus. He didn't raise his voice, but in the quiet, every word was clear. You lying piece of garbage." He thrust a finger toward Marcus's chest. "You were in my house. You ate at my table with my wife." He shook his head, a world of disgust in the motion. "The evidence. I have it all. You're done." Marcus took a step back, his hands coming up in a placating gesture. "Mark, please. This is a misunderstanding. We can talk about this somewhere." "There's nothing to talk about," Mark spat. He looked at me then, and his anger softened into something like pity. "I'm sorry, Alicia, truly." Then he turned and walked out, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence. All eyes were on Marcus. The perfect facade was gone, stripped away in 3 successive blows. The devoted son exposed to his parents. The ethical employee summoned by his boss, the trustworthy friend confronted by a betrayed husband. The three pillars of his external identity were crumbling at once. The master of ceremonies, oblivious to the drama, tapped the microphone. And now, for the award for business leadership. Marcus didn't move. He was staring at the floor, his breath coming in short gasps. The table was a tableau of acute discomfort. I stood up. I placed a gentle hand on his arm. He flinched. I leaned close, my voice for his ear alone, calm and utterly clear. "It's over, Marcus, the game, the image, it's all over." I pulled back slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. What I saw there was not sadness for hurting me, but a terrified, furious comprehension of his own ruin. He finally understood who had been holding the lens. I gave his arm a final pat, a parody of wifely comfort. Then I turned. I picked up my small clutch from the table. I did not look back at the table of staring colleagues, at his stricken parents, at the podium where another man's name was being called to applause. I walked out of the ballroom, my head held high, my steps measured. The sounds of the gala, the music, the clinking glasses, the resumed chatter, faded behind me. I walked through the glittering lobby, past the chandeliers and the marble, and out into the cool night air. I did not call a cab immediately. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the city air. The performance was finished. The curtain had fallen. There was no triumph, only a vast and quiet emptiness. I had gotten what I wanted. His reputation, the thing he valued more than his marriage, was in tatters. The truth was out. A taxi pulled up. I got in and gave the driver my address. As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the glowing hotel. Inside, Marcus's life was unraveling in public view. My work was done. It was time to go home. Not to the house I shared with him, but to the new space I had already begun to carve out for myself within it. The victory was quiet, and it was mine alone. He did not come home that night. I did not expect him to. The house was profoundly quiet, but for the first time the quiet felt like mine. I slept through the night in the guest room, a deep, dreamless sleep. The following weeks unfolded with a stark, procedural clarity. Marcus moved into a corporate apartment. Communication was handled through Sylvia Grant. The evidence packets had done their work with brutal efficiency. He was suspended from his job pending a full ethics review. His parents, horrified and humiliated, offered me their awkward, guilty support. The social ripple effects were immediate and severe. I was met with a wave of sympathy from our neighbors and mutual friends, which I accepted with quiet grace. I did not badmouth him. I simply stated that the situation was painful and private, and I was focusing on moving forward. My dignity, in contrast to his exposure, became its own testament. The divorce proceedings were straightforward. Sylvia was a pit bull. With the evidence of adultery and financial deception, the settlement was favorable. The house, which was in both our names but for which I could demonstrate disproportionate personal investment in time and care, was awarded to me. A sizable portion of our savings and investments came to me as well. It was not about greed. It was about restitution for years of unpaid labor and shattered trust. It was about securing my future. The day the divorce was finalized, I called Irene. "It's done." "Good," she said. "Now, what are you going to do with that big, empty house?" I had already been thinking about it. The house was a beautiful shell, a monument to a life that was no longer mine. But its structure was solid. Its space was generous. It was filled with light. I did not want to sell it. I wanted to reclaim it, to redefine its purpose. "I have an idea," I said. The idea became a project. The Historical Society grant I was consulting on focused on community archives, gathering and preserving the everyday histories of our neighborhood. I proposed a pilot program, turning my home into a community archive and reading room. The ground floor, the formal living and dining rooms, would become a public space. Shelves for local historical materials, comfortable chairs, a reading nook, a place for neighborhood associations to meet, for book clubs, for quiet study. The upstairs would remain my private apartment. David Chen and the grant committee loved it. It fit the mandate perfectly. The funding would help with the conversion, shelving, climate control for documents, a few computers. It was a way to make the house serve something beyond myself. Irene became my chief accomplice. We spent days sorting through the remnants of my old life. We packed Marcus's belongings into boxes for him to collect. We donated furniture that held bad memories. We painted the living room a soft, warm cream, covering the precise color Marcus had insisted upon. On a bright Saturday morning, I stood on a ladder in that room, painting the final corner near the ceiling. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. Music played from a speaker, a jazz album I loved, not chosen to please anyone else. Irene was below me, sorting books into categories. "You know," she said, looking around, "it's going to be beautiful. It already feels different, lighter." "It does," I agreed, dipping my roller into the tray. My phone buzzed on the floor. I climbed down and wiped my hands on my paint-splattered jeans. It was David. "Alicia, hi. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. I'm just painting." "Great. Listen, the board was so impressed with the community archive proposal. They've authorized an expansion of your consulting role. They want you to design the curriculum for a series of public workshops on personal archiving and family history. It would be a contracted position for the next year. Is that something you'd be interested in?" I looked around the sunlit room, at the shelves waiting to be filled, at Irene smiling at me over a stack of books. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I am very interested." "Excellent. I'll email you the details. Welcome back, Dr. Carter." I ended the call. I stood there for a moment, the phone in my hand. Dr. Carter. The title, my work, my home, my vision, they were all aligning into a coherent whole. "Good news?" Irene asked. "A new project, a year-long contract." Irene's smile widened. "I told you were smarter than him." I put the phone down and climbed back up the ladder. I finished painting the corner. The room was complete. The transformation was both literal and symbolic. I had taken the stage set of my old life and repurposed it into a space for community, for history, for quiet thought. The perfect facade was gone. In its place was something real, something useful. Later that afternoon, we took a break, sitting on the floor with glasses of iced tea. The house was quiet, but it was a productive quiet, full of potential. "Are you happy?" Irene asked, her tone direct. I considered the question. I was not happy in a simple, bubbly sense. The grief and betrayal were still there, like old scars, present but no longer raw. What I felt was something more solid, contentment, purpose, peace. "I am at peace," I said finally, "and I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Irene nodded, satisfied. "That's all anyone can ask for." The revenge was complete, but it was not the destruction of Marcus that defined my victory. It was this, the morning sunlight on a freshly painted wall, the weight of a meaningful contract, the loyalty of a true friend, the quiet authority of my own name. I had not just exposed his lie, I had rebuilt my truth. The house was no longer a symbol of his success. It was the archive of my resilience. And for the first time in a very long time, the story it told was my own.